Hi, Joe. Good evening to everyone and welcome to India, Joe. I'm Menaka Doshi and I work with Bloomberg, and I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation with a man, as Mukesh has pointed out, has had sort of a varied life as an entrepreneur, an investor, someone who fixes problems, as he's described it, and a techpreneur, if I can call it that. Joe, why India? I believe this is your first working trip here?
That's right. And thank you for having me. We're excited to be here. We've been doing stuff with India for 15 years, to be honest. But the way I'd say it is 15 years ago in the technology world, you'd send very well-defined problems here, not necessarily your hardest problems, and you'd outsource things. And nowadays, I think over the last 5 years, I've been seeing increasingly we send our hardest problems here, and they're solved much faster than we expect. And so the technology culture here has gotten to be very strong. A lot of my smartest friends have been coming back here, building teams here. By coincidence, I saw a friend today who we founded a company with in the U.S. that's very successful. He's moving back here. So there's so much talent right now. And, obviously China and India were the two biggest places for talent outside of the U.S. And India, as it's getting stronger, is very impressive. And China's a place we're not actually really able to work anymore. I can't even go to China anymore because of my defense work. And so this is obviously the place that we're going to be.
Okay. You have almost half a dozen investments in the country already. I think 6 or 7 companies that 8 VCs invested in India. How well do you how would you characterize the country? Because you've sort of compared it to what the China opportunity currently is. But you're also a libertarian. And I understand that, big government isn't something that would sit very comfortably with you. And India is all about big government. So I'm just curious to know that when you look at India and you look at business opportunities here, do you look at the country from a macro point of view? Are you looking at the micro solutions that you're funding?
If I were to characterize my views on government, I like when government's competent, right? And I think it has gotten more competent here. Or you guys tell me, but I do believe it's going in the right direction. And I think you have a lot of competent people. We were just with the chairman of Infosys, who's spent a lot of time building a lot of great things. It's amazing what you've done with UPI and with national identity. And there's so many things that are going in the right direction here. But more important than that is we're here because we're working with competent people. So I think there's 5 cities where we have big teams for our companies back in the U.S. And so yes, we've written 5 or 6 small checks into India so far, and we'd like to write a lot more because there's so much great talent. But even beyond that, there's probably over 1,000 people in the country working for different companies, and we're trying to hire hundreds more next year. We have teams in Chennai and Pune, here in Bangalore and Mumbai. I think there's one in Delhi. So there's many teams of really great talent here that we're trying to hire. And when you start to get to know teams who are working with you, who are solving hard problems, that's a great way to then expand and start backing them. Because, a lot of the best venture investors in Silicon Valley, a lot of them, especially in my generation, didn't start off as investors. They started off as entrepreneurs. Sure. And when you build with somebody and you get to know the best people and you have wins together, you learn lessons, and then the people go off and they build other companies and you back them doing that. So very similarly now, we're starting to meet all this talent here. We'd love to support many of them in their next adventures.
And this talent is talent that your investee companies will, sort of hire and work with? Or are you specifically looking at broadening the number of investments you do in India? Is there an allocated number that you hope to put, to work in the country?
Well, it's really both. I think that the number one thing, again, is we're trying to hire hundreds more people for our portfolio companies, which are U.S. companies. But, for example, we have a big investment in a company, Rocket Lane, and Sri, who runs Rocket Lane, was one of the stars at Freshworks with Girish there, who you guys, everyone knows probably Freshworks here. It's a big win. And I think this is a very common pattern you see in the technology world, is that you get a lot of really talented people around a big win. They all learn from the experience, and then the most talented people go off and they build something new. And that's a great way for us to then back them. So we led the Series A and co-led the Series B in Rocket Lane. And, would love to get to know more talents around the top companies here, and other people like that, and that's kind of a good guide for us to know which talent to try to back and to try to work with.
Okay, so do you typically allocate, sort of in your head, do you say, okay, I'm looking at maybe putting this much money to work in India over the next 2 to 5 years? But that's not how you approach it.
It's not really how you approach it. You want to put money into whatever great things you can find. Money is not our scarce resource, like the things that back are, and so I guess my investors would probably think I was crazy if I started putting dozens of investments into here, because that'd be a lot. But I would love to make many more investments in the next few years here.
So what kind of ideas would appeal to you? I know you're a big talent person, but if there are, entrepreneurs in the room, what should they be pitching to?
Well, so in venture capital, there's really two questions that we look for. If you look what the top firms are worried about, of course, the value of your best talent, but you want to work on hard problems that are possible now, that create value, that are possible now, that were not possible 3 to 5 years ago. So the question is, what's possible now? Well, of course, everyone knows it's everything going on in the AI world. And, the parts of AI that we're most interested in, that I'm really bullish on, especially I'd say for people in India would work on, is the application layer. It's the services layer. And I think India is a very dominant services economy. I think it's very good at it. And there are many, many types of services in the US where these companies have been around for 30, 40, 50 years. And you couldn't really disrupt them before because technology really couldn't get into these workflows. For example, a healthcare billing workflow, logistics workflows, workflows for hiring processes, workflows for the back end of a legal or financial office. There's many, many things like that the AI is good enough to make it much more productive. And so we're very bullish on what we call AI services, which is both the technology, but also the ability to kind of outsource these things fully. And so rather than have 10 people in the back of your legal office, you might have one person plus an AI service. There's things like that we think are very interesting to look at.
Okay, I'm going to backtrack on AI a little bit. So I was hoping to get to that in just a bit and, pin you down a little bit more on India. But since you brought up AI, how do we look at this opportunity? Is it just a sort of a gigantic productivity enhancer opportunity in the near term? Or are you looking at a far bigger change brought about by AI? And what is most monetizable in this opportunity in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think you hit upon the right word. I think productivity is the key thing. So if we back up, it's not, there's nothing too much in economics. It's far bigger than productivity. Productivity is the biggest thing, right? So if you look at the wealth of any nation, the wealth is tied to the productivity of the nation per person. And so if you increase productivity, it increases wealth for all. It's very positive sum. That's one of the most important things we could do is increase productivity. And so there's many, many areas right now where we're already seeing. So for example, I live in Austin, Texas, and one of the other big tech guys there is Michael Dell. And Michael was saying in conversation earlier, he thinks he's going to have perhaps 20% higher productivity for his company the next couple of years. He has over 100,000 people in this company. That's a very big deal, right? So I think that's huge. And you're already seeing around the world, different types of customer support places that are taking 70% of the calls with AI, and the people are happier with those calls. And so I think productivity is just starting to go up in these areas. It's still very early, but I think it's very likely that over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it actually is a big enough productivity change that it impacts the entire economy, both in the U.S. and then hopefully to follow in India as well. India is moving into the digital economy. It has more stuff offline right now, so India would be a little slower to impact. But this is gonna create a lot of wealth for India for building and selling these things. It's gonna create a lot of wealth for a lot of the world, because if you have big companies that are more productive, then we all get more for less.
Okay, but is that where the big money will be made?
Well,
in the AI ventures that help enhance productivity?
Well, if you look at the last wave, the SaaS wave as an example, you get a certain amount. There's a whole stack, so you get a lot of things made. And the base of the infrastructure stack, which is things like NVIDIA and chip companies, and there's other competitors too, but they're dominating there right now, which is a very impressive company. And you get the infrastructure software. So you have a few people here in India as well working on SaaS software that's helping AI to be deployed, to help you create synthetic data to train things, to help you manage your deployments, all sorts of things there. And then you go higher up the stack, and you do get the application layer and the services layer. And so our contention is it's not just going to be like SaaS applications of AI, it's going to be actually the services themselves. And so, there's if you go back 21 years to when we started Palantir, there weren't very many great tech cultures. So just building the technology itself, just building the new infrastructure and applying that properly to these parts of the U.S. that did not have tech, that was a very hard, very valuable thing to do. Fast forward to today, there's a lot of people who are good at building tech now, but I think having operational cultures that learn how to deploy AI with services and tech together with higher productivity, that's actually a higher level challenge where it's going to create a lot more of the value. I think there's probably at least like 15 or 20 different companies needed for how big companies use AI. So if you say SaaS for AI infrastructure, that's a big category. And
I see a lot of people working on it in India. I'd say there's going to be at least a few big companies there that are interesting.
One of the things that you've spoken very vocally about is that government should not rush into regulating AI this quickly, right? I'm guessing you met with Nandan today, so you would have probably discussed a little bit of that, because I just saw recent comments from Nandan saying that, we shouldn't rush in India to regulate AI, and in fact, there should be a little bit of a self-regulatory process. Maybe he said the same words to you, but like Dr. Stegler, the properties oaths, that's what AI industry folks should do. I'm just curious, there's a great degree of dualism when it comes to AI. How do you see that?
I think that a lot of people are threat-scared, and so I think you get a lot of negative energy with new things. We saw this in the U.S. very dramatically 150 years ago with the Luddite movement, with the Second Industrial Revolution. And it's very interesting to me because when the Luddite movement was happening, it was actually a very serious thing. If you imagine, everyone used to only ever work on farms pretty much, or local manufacturers, and suddenly you're about to get rid of like a half of farming jobs and more than half local manufacturing jobs thanks to breakthroughs. So you can kind of imagine this would be a scary thing. I give them credit for being scared. It makes more sense. And it's interesting to me because in school when you learn about it, we just make fun of them. Oh, those old Luddites. In fact, back when I was in school in the 1980s and 90s, you'd learn about the Luddites. Oh, those dumb people. And they were wrong, of course. But you can see why they believe that. I have a lot less tolerance and sympathy for people who are Luddites today after we already saw the last 150 years of history. We understand economics and we understand how new jobs get created. We understand how wealth gets created through productivity. I think you have to be like a lower IQ today to be a Luddite than you did in the 1870s. And so I think they're just obviously wrong. And it's embarrassing. So Europe is terrible at this. So Europe used to be, when I was a kid, almost as wealthy as the U.S. Now our poorest parts of the U.S. where we make fun of the people in Louisiana or whatever, they're much wealthier than the wealthiest parts of Europe, pretty much. And because Europe has vastly overregulated itself and made it really hard to build businesses there. And it's sad that you see the AI regulation they're proposing. Not only would these regulations make it even harder for them to build any tech businesses, but it actually would have made like the last 10 years of advancements, for example, in AI for doctors and radiology, would have made those illegal. You couldn't even do the things in the last 10 years because the way they're writing it, the people in charge are so behind and so misguided that they're shooting themselves in the foot. And so there's really a framework of accelerating, embracing a positive sum society where we create more wealth for all. We use that, and that wealth is something that everyone benefits from overall. Or you decelerate and you have a more zero-sum world, which is a much nastier, a much tougher world. And I'd much rather live in the positive-sum world. And I hope we can get the politicians not to interfere and not to stop us from driving towards a positive-sum world.
There's fear of change, and I get why you think that there should be, at this point in time, even more scorn for fear of change. But there's also fear of the misuse, abuse, of AI, of technological change. And I'm just curious as to what controls that. How do you see that being controlled, if not regulation?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. And so it's true. We do have the ability now, and it's going to be interesting to watch the U.S. election. You do have an ability to create videos and to create other information that looks very real, and it's very hard to know what's real. And the problem with top-down censorship and rules around these things, and maybe there's like a very high, very simple level rule where obviously we do already have laws in the books. You're not allowed to put something out that's libel, for example. So maybe you trace where things come from, and you're not allowed to lie about things. But the problem is you see all around the world right now a very scary censorship apparatus that's trying to do things from one side to the other. So, for example, in Brazil, the government has a lot more power than the government in America. And so you have the Supreme Court justice in Brazil, I don't know if you follow this at all, ordering all social media companies, they try to turn off his rivals. So he's on one side, he's in the hard left, and he says, okay, these guys on the right, I need you to turn them off, and I need you to say, don't say I said to turn them off, say it's a violation of the services. So he sends this to all the social media companies, and everybody except for Elon Musk just does it right away because everyone says, oh, okay, fine, I'm just going to do it because I'm told to. And Elon says, that's not honorable. I'm not going to say they violate terms of service. They're your political enemies. This is wrong. And so we helped the U.S. Congress investigate it right away. They pushed back. They showed all the data. That way it's not his fault doing it. And there's people on the streets in Brazil rioting against this guy who's abusing his power. And thank goodness Elon pushed back because until Elon owns Twitter, what you saw in the U.S. and Brazil and other countries is these governments using their regulatory power to really enforce one political side, and that's very dangerous. That's very dangerous. So I think the danger of giving government power over these things is much, much worse than the danger of having things out in the open. So do we want to be careful to track and be transparent? Yes. But do you want to give the government power over these things? No, because we've seen it in the U.S. and Brazil and Australia, all these other countries abusing this power, and that's dangerous.
I get your fear, and your Twitter example was interesting because I think Twitter has, in the recent past and even before Elon bought it, sort of taken off content on account.
They turned down a lot of accounts in the tech world, including mine. And when Elon moved in, you saw there was things on the account to turn it down because they didn't like my points of view. Because the people running Twitter were 98% on one extreme. So anyone who wasn't on their side, they were turning it down. And it was government NGOs encouraging them to do it. So there's a government, the people trying to study disinformation in the government, they weren't actually studying disinformation. They were themselves disinformation radicals who had gotten to charge these organizations. And by the way, this is always what happens. When you start a regulatory body, it gets captured by the people who want to use it for their power. So you know who's capturing right now the regulatory bodies for AI? It's the big companies. It's Microsoft's on the board. It's OpenAI. It's others. And so the question is, for India especially, you're going to build a lot of competitors here to a lot of the tools these big companies are developing. You don't want the regulatory body owned by these big companies because they're going to try to block the competitors from here and say only we can be in charge. So you can see from the Indian perspective, you want to hope to keep it open and hope those big companies fail in putting in too many rules so only they get to win. And it's the same thing with these other bodies. So you just got to be very careful because whenever you create power in the world, there's someone who's incentive to capture that power, and that's very dangerous.
Okay, I'm going to come back to this thread, but I'll talk about the India opportunity for AI. Microsoft and Satya Nadella was here in February, and he spoke of Microsoft wanting to train 2 million Indian engineers in AI, and AI being a game changer as India aims to become a $5 trillion economy. We're in India after a long time, and this is only a day one here, but you look at the economy and how big an impact you think something like that.
It's going to be an absolutely huge impact. And if you want to say, how do we spread wealth to the next several hundred million people here, very quickly? AI could be a wave that does that much more quickly than we thought before. Because, AI it's not just productivity for services. Eventually it's going to be productivity for manufacturing as well. It's going to be productivity for cleaning up the environment, for example. I am going to Mumbai tomorrow and I was looking at the rivers and there's things we could do there for, much more cheaply using machines to clean this stuff up eventually. And so there's all these really positive things. And yes, India, as you guys know, India has a massive set of talents here. There's millions of people who are capable of learning how to be top computer scientists, capable of learning how to deploy AI. You already have this going on, obviously, with your biggest, companies like Infosys and Wipro and others on that side. I think those companies are going to continue to grow and use this, and it's going to be an opportunity for everyone. So I'm very positive on what this means for India.
I come back to power, the moral implications of technology, and all the more interesting controversial stuff to talk about. There has been an impression that's built up when it comes to, the Valley. We are not in the Valley anymore. But
I visit a lot. It's the AI center still.
Sure. That the believer group in a tech utopia, has only just expanded over the last few years. And in many ways, the Valley today represents what Wall Street represented before the global financial crisis. It doesn't pay enough to the impact of technology, not just the good ones, but the bad as well. I'd love for you to talk about your thoughts around this because I know you spent a lot of time thinking and talking about this and hoping to solve it through your various efforts, whether it's Cicero or Boston University.
Yeah, so there's many different parts of Silicon Valley and what it works on. I think the majority of the things I've worked on tend to be in big industries, and if you make big industries more efficient, I just think that's actually overall just positive, some better for everyone. So there's tons of areas where I don't see real serious downsides. I think the downsides that I'm seeing right now from the technology world, probably, so I actually have 4 daughters at home. I was expecting a son this summer, a 5th. And my eldest daughter's only 7, so it's not a challenge yet. But I've been reading the latest research especially for young girls with social media. And I think there's a real challenge there. I think the incentives of social media companies is effectively to create new types of drugs. If you look at the way that they get you addicted to them, it's very similar to the dopamine response from things like heroin and otherwise. And as the AI improves in social media, it's making a more and more potent drug. And there's a great new book by Jonathan Haidt, who's one of the people we follow in America, called The Anxious Generation. And it really maps out the massive increase in mental health problems with young people in the U.S. And he goes over the data and the details, and it's very convincing. It does seem tied to a world in which we're socializing these young people, especially these young girls, into a social media world, and they're learning a lot of things from that world that are actually not at all natural for how people are supposed to work and how we're supposed to work with each other. There's interesting studies of children who really seem to get naturalized socially permanently between the age of about 9 to 15. So like back when Japan was a very different country in the 70s, the kids who came over and they went back to Japan, if they didn't go back before 15, they never really felt Japanese because they socialized in the U.S. and vice versa. So you kind of map this out. And so you're socializing into a really weird environment where you're like seeking approval for the wrong things, and you're trying to copy whoever's popular online, and you're trying to be very careful not to get canceled, and it just all these things it's doing to people's mental health is very bad. So I think, my kids are not going to be on social media until they're 15 or 16. I think it's just very unhealthy.
How are you going to stop them?
We're building our own school. This is not the university. It's like a kindergarten to 8th grade school. And we're going to have all the families who are part of this school not have their kids on social media. So I think if you have a social milieu where the other kids are not on it as well, it becomes a lot easier. I think it's very difficult if you go to a normal school and the other kids are on, it becomes too hard. So we're able to create that for ourselves. But I think this experiment where it is a very new powerful type of drug that is addicting all of us if we're not careful to these platforms, I think you have to be aware to ask yourself, first of all, if this is something that's acting on all of us. And second of all, maybe we don't want to test these experiments on our kids as we're learning them. It might be bad.
Your solution is self-regulation, not government regulation, because I think when social media started out, you probably can make the argument to say it's somebody AI can, for the positive change that AI can bring about. But the argument was similar even then, 10, 15 years ago, that don't regulate social media because it has a social impact. So I'm just wondering why.
The AI thing is a little bit more towards productivity, which is a very measurable thing in the economy. And I think social media, I think the problem is actually very funny. One of the few areas where the market consistently has failures in terms of incentives seems to be media. It seems to be media click-through rate. So you had the first yellow journalism in America about 120 years ago. And this is like the criers where you'd have to have silly headlines because you have to have kids running around saying, hear all about it, this is what's happening. So you'd have these clickbait headlines equivalent with clickbait. And then you went back to this business model, which is a much healthier business model for media in the mid-20th century, which was everyone just subscribed. So there's no need for clickbait. There was no need for kind of nonsense to try to get you to read it. And I think that's a very healthy model for media. And then when you go to the media on the internet in general, it's just very unhealthy how it works on average because you have people like the headline is so important, right? And it's all about what gets people to click through. It's all about affirming something that they really strongly believe in their own little bubble. So I think media itself, unfortunately, has very bad incentives. And so I think social media is playing off of that in a really unhealthy way and creating these attention drugs. I'm not sure. I think the only other equivalent of that in our society might be like gambling, for example. So I think you could argue that it makes sense to have some rules around gambling, around like addictive social media, around these things that are addictive, that are effectively drugs, at least for kids. I think you could have rules. And you do see some U.S. states passing some rules for kids. I tend to think this is something that should be left to parents, but I empathize with the people who want to protect kids from it. So that's definitely a fair argument.
So it's not the fault of technology, it's the fault of media.
Well, I think it's the fault of the incentives. I think if you're working in media, there's some really good people who try to do an honorable job anyway, of course, who are good people in media. But I think that the incentives of the media companies, unfortunately, is kind of bad incentives right now for a lot of what you're doing.
Very deeply influenced by players like Google.
Oh, of course. But
So I'm just bringing the circle back to technology.
No, but it's based on what's possible, right? So it's not like somebody created like an evil Google versus a good Google. It's like if you just what's the set of all possibilities for how this works? Is that when you're in a world where you're competing for attention, and competing for click through, and competing for that's just a world that exists, right? Is possible. then it's gonna have those incentives. And so I do think media incentives just are naturally misaligned, which is an interesting thing we all have to deal with. And the question is, can you rebuild? So some people are trying to build new media properties like the information in Silicon Valley. They try to go back to a subscription model and away from like BuzzFeed kind of TechCrunch kind of big headlines to get people. But I think it's a hard thing to figure out.
Okay, so we shouldn't regulate it. I just come back to that again.
I think watching it carefully is probably a smart thing. So if you really want to talk about like the ultimate doomerism, you guys probably know is basically like there's a lot of people in tech who see it as the Messiah effectively. So it's a very funny end of times. And this might sound nonsense, but that is what it is for a lot of people. It's a version of the Messiah, which is an end of times thing, which is the singularity. It goes exponentially. You effectively create something. It's effectively a god. It has much higher intelligence and changes the whole world. Once you have an intelligence, it's that high and that different than us. You're changing the nature of reality. And I personally don't believe that's where it's going. I think reality doesn't explode into exponentials. I think it has S's. I think you have an exponential that levels off. I think there's barriers to it going that exponential and changing everything. But if you are to believe that, and that's coming, I don't really think you can stop it anyway. And that's a debate we can have. He's definitely not mainstream. He's definitely a really great thinker. I'd say that there's a movement. So Milton Friedman was one of the great economists, followed in the footsteps of people like Lee Kuan Yew and others who have had huge influence on the world and done very positive things, and just create a new city-state or two. And so just like Hong Kong and Singapore had a hugely positive impact on China and the region, the idea is, can we create one of these in North America? Can we create one of these around India or somewhere else, and then experiment with new ideas for how could a city-state work? How could government work differently? And I don't think you want to experiment with all of India. I don't think you want to experiment with all of the U.S. That wouldn't be the right thing to do. And so the idea is that let's experiment with these new places and teach people new models of government. And then based on the innovation that works, we can take some of those things and apply them back to our larger population centers. And so I think that's overall a very positive and very good idea. There's so many new ways you can form. You take the principles that are positive behind our governments and reapply them in new ways in the 21st century, thanks to new principles that are possible with the technology world and with what we've learned about our constitution and checks on power and things like that. So overall, I agree with Balaji. That's a really good thing to explore for innovation. I don't think you automatically create a utopia. Obviously, you don't. That's not how the world works. But trying new things is very important. One of the scariest, most negative things would be to have a global government that basically stops you from trying new things, and you just get stuck and you decelerate and you break everything. You always want to be able to try new things.
Is that where we are right now in an era of big government everywhere? I mean, there's so much being written even just about the return of industrial policy, which is very interesting.
It does worry me things are going more in that direction. I mean, in the U.S., you see the regulatory state is massive. There's 1 million rules at the federal level. There's 9 million words per state. There's a very, very activist group of people that frankly are activists. I mean, when Elon Musk speaks up and does things, he gets his companies harassed from every one of these groups. When my co-founder of Palantir, Peter Thiel, spoke up and decided to support Trump, not everyone in our company did, obviously. He's one of the founders. 2 months later, the DOJ, the activists there, tried to sue Palantir for not hiring enough Asians. We don't discriminate against Asians. We have 25% in that case, and they should be 40. And we're not allowed to hire people from China. But anyway, so I'm very scared of like weaponized power in the hands of people in government. And I do think it's important to have these experiments. So I really think the Balaji idea is very important. And then back to Silicon Valley itself. It's interesting. I won't say who because it was a private conference, but I was with people who created the big tech companies, and a couple of them were saying they're more religious these days, and as a thing, as a reaction to where the world is and to what's going on in the world. And I do think people have different views where technology itself doesn't solve everything. I think there's wisdom in faith. There's wisdom in like a lot of old traditions. As you have in India as well. And I don't think technology is the end all and be all. I think technology is a tool, but then I think we have to look to other wisdom for how we use that tool.
And do you think it's a pro-democracy tool nowadays, or less of that maybe?
I think the nature of social media is very dangerous because I think it polarizes naturally. And so I think going back to that conversation, I think democracy itself is helped by a creation of wealth and by a creation of and by bringing everyone into it. I think the ability to educate more people, to lift them up with technology, with AI, is a very positive thing. Everyone's going to be able to have their own personal tutor. So I think democracy fails when people on the margins are doing worse. So from that side, it's very pro-democracy. From the social media side of polarizing all of us and making sure we only hear the bubble that we like to want to hear and making people fight more, that side is very unhealthy for democracy. So it has both positives and negatives.
Okay, you spoke of Trump. You were a Trump supporter once. Or is once incorrect?
I prefer Trump to Biden, but I respect people who disagree. I prefer the policies from the Trump administration, I should say, to the policies from the Biden administration is my thing. It's not about the personal character because there's different problems there with both of them.
Have you studied the Indian government? Can I sneak in a question on the Indian government? Or is one day too short a time?
I'm going to get myself in huge trouble here. I think you have a lot. I said earlier, I think there's some very competent people doing some very competent things, and I don't know the characters myself very personally.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. You've built what? Half a dozen or more billion-dollar companies. I'm curious. Is there a secret sauce to this? What do you think you've done repeatedly right?
So
when you look back.
Yeah, so I was a kid and I tried 2 times to get into PayPal when I was there. Freshman year at Stanford, they rejected me. They brought me in for an internship sophomore year. And PayPal at the time, you guys know, was Peter Thiel had started the company with Matt Sochin, and a lot of his smartest friends, people like Reid Hoffman who later built LinkedIn and David Sachs and others. And Elon Musk had started the company with his smartest friends named X.com, and they merged. X and Infinity merged because they were 2 of the best competitors in the space. They became PayPal. And Elon kept wanting to rename it X. He never was allowed to, so of course he did that later. But and I was very lucky to be there because now knowing who Elon and Peter are, it's no surprise that a lot of their smartest friends then built a lot of great companies. And so the lessons from that group for me, first of all, obviously you had a lot of very talented people. So building a company where you give upside and you spend a lot of time getting the most talented people to want to be there, that's obviously very important. I'm very lucky to be in those networks. But you also attracted a lot of people. Why did so many people come out of that PayPal group? You had a lot of very opinionated people. And it's not all opinion, but it's not all opinion on one side. I mean, Reid and I were actually on a panel together at another conference recently, and Reid famously is very much a big supporter on the left, and I tend to be on the more liberty side of things, but we're still friends who agree on a lot about how the world works. But in both cases, I think we have a lot of strong opinions about things. And so I think having opinions as an entrepreneur where you see the world and you say, okay, actually, this is wrong, this is broken, this is not how it should work, and I'm going to get a bunch of smart people, and we're all going to fix it, and we're going to iterate, we're going to learn as we go along. I think that's the right kind of framework. You want to have people who are opinionated, and you see things, and you say, we're going to change this because it's not correct. So I think if you do that consistently while studying and being interested in business, there's a lot of things you can do.
Okay. So, they don't seem like things that the talent that I get, but it doesn't all of it doesn't seem easy for an entrepreneur to duplicate. So if you had to create a quick list, here's how to do things the Joe Lonsdale way, what would that quick list have?
Well, so you need to build a technology culture. So go work for a really great technology culture. Be part of something like a Freshworks here, or be part of something that's working really well. Understand how that culture works with engineers, exposes engineers to the problems, and it gives them upside. And then along with that, you probably want a good design culture and all the other. And then you want to be able to build a sales culture without putting the salespeople in charge, because what tends to happen is the sales guys tend to feel like the alpha man, and they come in and they want to order the engineers around, and that breaks everything. So you got to be very careful to have the engineers still be in charge while having the salespeople. So anyway, there's all these things like that. It's cultural stuff. And so you got to know how to build a culture. And then in terms of what you want to work on, you probably should talk to somebody who's built a lot of companies already, or who's an investor who's helped invest in a lot of companies, because they're going to have a point of view about what's possible now, that's not possible before. And you want to go really deep and really learn a couple of areas you're very interested in. Find a place where you think there's a new possibility. Talk about that idea. One of the things Peter Thiel always taught me when I was very young is a lot of people, when they have their startup idea, they think, oh, this is my idea. I can't tell anyone. It's secret. It might be copied. And so imagine India is a big country. If you have that idea, there's probably 5 other people who have that idea too. And imagine if 4 of them just don't tell anyone and just build it, and one of them goes and talks to the smartest people they can find and gets feedback. Which of the 5 is going to win, right? So go talk to other smart people, iterate, and then put these cultures together. And you want to, the hard thing is not seeing where the industry could be in 5 or 10 years. It's also seeing the path. So you really want to strategize about what can I build in 1 year or 2 years that gets me enough proof points, enough resources to attract more people to attract more financing so I can keep going towards this longer term vision. And that's some of how we think about it.
Okay, so every journalist asks you the question I just did, which is that every journalist and every podcast, which is, what's the secret sauce? But very few people ask you about failure. The one instance that you have spoken of repeatedly is, I think, some of the bets that went wrong when you and Peter were working at the hedge fund, or Clarion, if I remember correctly. But besides that, what would you recount as really difficult situations that you've been in that you've learned from? Because I don't think we talk about failure enough, whether it's in the Valley or in Bangalore.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of things. One common thing I've seen that I've made this mistake, as well as people I've worked for have made this mistake, is usually after your first really big success where you make a lot of money, if you're an entrepreneurial person, you try to do too many things at once. And that's a big mistake. And you forget that the reason you succeeded in the first place is you were so focused. So I've definitely been through that mistake myself as well. Other mistakes, just when a lot of really famous or popular people are doing something, you get very excited by it, and it's easy to be led astray. So I helped Lady Gaga start a company with my friends once. I was a founding chairman, which was very exciting. It was during her height of her fame, and it was littlemonsters.com. And we tripled her merchandise sales at the time because we had all our fans posting and liking things. We make the merchandise for their stuff. And we thought we were very smart, but we really put a lot of resources into it. And she'd come and sit in the engineers' laps and stuff. It was before me too, I guess. It was all fun. And then so we got so tied up how cool it was that I think that when we started trying to apply it to other celebrities, it wasn't really fit for them at all. It was really tailored to her. And then she wasn't touring as much for a little bit, and the company basically went away. And it was a big mistake because it was, this is so cool, but we didn't necessarily always have our business hats on in the right way because we were distracted maybe by that.
Okay. One last question before I open this up to the audience. You're a student of history, economic history especially. So if you were assigned to write down the highlights of the era we're living in, the age that we're living in let's say a few points, what do you think those points would be? What would those highlights be?
I think the age, if we're looking at it from the economic and technological side, is, like I said earlier, you get these waves of companies based on what's newly possible. And so if you go back, just from the tech side, I think just really quickly, there were 5 big waves the last 100 years, right? The first big wave was the electronics companies, with the top 2 students at Stanford at the time, Sheila and Packard, as we know their names, and they brought out all this talent to Silicon Valley, and there's a big electronics companies wave. They're the biggest one. And then you had the semiconductor wave, and that was one of the Nobel Prize winners who created, transistor, Shockley. You guys know this story? It's actually pretty funny. He hired the 8 top people in America at the time, and we thought were up and comers. He brought them out of Palo Alto, where his mom lived, and he's nearby there, like Stanford. And it turned out he was like the worst boss ever, and he kept giving them lie detector tests. So they all left. They're called the Traitors 8. My friend's named APC. The Traitors 8 started Fairchild. This is guys like Moore of Moore's Law, Eugene Kleiner, Kleiner Perkins, is all, they later started, National and Intel. So you get that big wave of chips. And now you have all these guys who built all these computers selling chips, but there's not enough software. So a lot of them became venture capitalists and started investing in software, because of course you need more software for industries to sell the chips. And so you got the big enterprise software wave, the late 60s, 70s, 80s. This oversimplifies it, of course, with the personal computer coming up and everything else on the consumer side. But you had to connect all the businesses. You had the networking wave, and that basically goes into the internet. And the internet was Web 1.0, Web 2.0, and mobile. Really consumer wave was Web 1.0, Web 2.0, and mobile. And I think consumer wave is when everyone kind of noticed tech in a much broader global sense. That was when we really got everyone on. And then you basically had what we call the smart enterprise wave, or the vertical SaaS wave, where thanks to cloud and big data, all these companies, for the first time since 1970s, replaced all their systems the last 15 years. And India played a big role in that, increasingly big role in that. And then that basically put a couple different things together. Because of that, and because of some big advances in science, you had a huge biotechnology infrastructure wave that's become a very big deal over the last 10 years. And then you have the AI wave. And really, it's really, DeepMind did a lot of important work with reasoning engines, which are very separate. And these are things that can automatically play Atari games, and stuff like that, and all the reasoning. And then you had the large parameter models with the transformers in 2017. And you're just starting to apply these now with tools. I think we're at the very early part of that wave over the next 5 or 10 years, that hopefully will hugely increase productivity in the economy and make a lot of people a lot more wealthy. Be very disruptive for us. It's going to create a lot of populism because people don't like being disrupted. And so we're at a very interesting time. We're about to see a bunch of, I think very positive for India. Maybe not as positive for the Philippines because they outsource a lot of things there that we're going to disrupt with AI. But we're right in the beginning of that wave, and that's the biggest thing going on right now.
Can you elaborate? I know I said it was the last question, but can you elaborate a little bit more on that India, Philippines, and why you think we stand to gain?
India has a much deeper technology culture base than the Philippines. The Philippines has a lot of people who outsource a lot of data tasks to them, and it has a lot of basic English language tasks to them that are not high-level tasks. And this has been very good because people are so poor there. And unfortunately, a lot of things that have been outsourced are going to be back in-sourced to engines being built in India, China, and America with AI. And so you're not going to need nearly as many of these people doing these real simple tasks anymore. And so I think this is going to be unfortunately tough on their economy. It will disrupt certain things in India as well, but I think India has so much more to gain from the innovation wave that's embracing and it's actually contributing to in a big way that overall that plus the productivity effects will be very positive for India.
Fair enough. I'd love to open this up to the audience. I'm sure we have several questions waiting to be asked. So I'd request that you put your hand up, introduce yourself, and keep the question short because we're all conscious of time.
We do advise on PAVC transactions. That's my day job, I'd like to say now, because a friend of mine and I are actually creating a magazine for kids, and so everything you said about the school kind of and social media obviously resonated a little bit because I feel like we're trying to disrupt it by going the print way and therefore trying to cut through the noise of information overload or misinformation. But we also do use some AI tools. We also do connect in the magazine itself to digital content because we're hoping that then it will feed better digital content to the kids. So I'm just wondering, in the model you're talking about, where you're creating kind of a bubble, do you think that they will miss out on a level playing field because it's not a level playing field anymore, sorry, if you don't have access to social media, right? And also, in that sense, it does create a little bit of a forbidden fruit thing by completely cutting it off. So do you think that there's a way that AI could introduce media literacy instead?
Yeah, no, I think it's very positive for kids overall to use AI for education and to create content around that. And there's nothing wrong with exposing kids to AI that's figuring out how to teach them. I think that's very positive. I think exposing kids to things that are drugs trying to get their attention for random stuff is not teaching them anything, and is trying to make them feel badly versus how other people look and stuff. And I think social media is very unhealthy, but AI for magazine education, I think a lot of people try to figure this out right now in the U.S. It's a big wave in the U.S. as well. We can make a lot of money doing things there because they're giving a lot of states are giving money back to the parents to get to decide how to use it versus just having to force them to use it on certain government schools. And so this is going to be a big market in the U.S.
Hi, I'm Abhishek, founder at Bloomberg. So at the recent G20 event which happened in India, a lot of countries showed interest around CBDC, which is central bank's digital currency, right? But now in US, we are listening that, for example, Biden administration said, hey, we'll do everything, but not CBDC. So for you, what are the top 2, 3, disruptions which is going to happen in fintech? And do you see central bank digital currency is going to play some role there?
I'm so glad you asked the question.
It's a fun topic. Well, you can probably tell from my other comments how I feel about this, right? So I think it's extraordinarily dangerous to give any authoritarian top-down control of a central bank digital currency. I think it's something that we should never ever do. And I think cryptocurrency is a great innovation because it takes away some of the power. And I think there's already states like Florida and others that have banned ever having CBDC be allowed. So it'd have to be a constitutional fight if they were to do it because we don't trust the government to have the ability to turn off the money that dramatically. We do think people would get to capture that power and use it for many corrupt ends. And so I would say that because authoritarianism is always a danger for any country, you're going to be very, very careful. I think UPI is wonderful. I think there's all these positive things happening in India with national IDs. So you can be part of the financial system better. And I think there's going to be a lot of innovation around how wealth management works. It's much faster and better. I think people in India, it's a huge trend where you don't just buy gold, you become part of the global financial system. So these are all positives. But I personally, and a lot of people who share my views, are very nervous to give governments that kind of power. China's going to embrace it almost for sure because they love being able to turn money off, just like they love being able to turn people off if they become inconvenient. But I'm against that.
But just an add-on to that. Sorry about this, but then the ledger should stay, right? The blockchain should stay. It's just that maybe the control should not. Why? Because if you see what's happening with SWIFT, right? Moving money between countries is painful, right? So
Yes, no, 100%. I am pro-innovation. The whole innovation of the blockchain was that there's no authoritarian control. The whole point of the blockchain is that that's something that can be controlled by the network. And so that's a healthy thing. And I think a competition of currencies is perfectly healthy. It's actually good for the world. You want multiple currencies competing, and you want banks to be able to transact much more easily than now. I think it's amazing what India has shown the world to be able to have this like zero cost payment network. I was just with the man who helped build it. He's the chairman of Infosys. It's extraordinary what you guys have done here. So it's yes, pro Swift innovation, anti being able to turn people off. Thank you.
Are you meeting the Reserve Bank of India when you go to Mumbai tonight?
No, I think maybe not this.
They're actively testing the CBDC.
Maybe not this trip. No, listen, I understand where they're coming from. I think people always underestimate the importance of checks on power. The great innovation that the American founders made in the late 18th century, coming out of the Enlightenment, and they were philosophers and scholars of this, is that you need to build things that very carefully all check each other. And it's very hard because things naturally fall into tyranny. And that's something that you just got to be really careful about. And this is something that is an unchecked power that I feel is much too dangerous for government to have.
Now, in India, if we have to look at it, how the AI to go to India, and of course to compete with the companies, because as of now, we see the power in the hands of a few multinational companies. Now, the main issue is what are the tools that we need to use and when is the timing? Because this is something that, as policy makers, we grapple with.
Yeah, sure. So the thing Elon and others are saying is they're worried about the Messiah conversation, not about this conversation. So I think we shouldn't mistake the two. I think this conversation, listen, it's something we have to have. The reality is that because of financial regulation in the U.S., for example, like if anyone in Silicon Valley wanted to compete with the guys in New York, they'd have to first spend like $50 million on digital. In any other country in the world, you have so many smart people that, because of the history, are stuck in poverty or stuck not exposed to what they actually could be accomplishing. There's so much untapped human potential. And when you make rules, therefore the world has to work with a big company, and therefore the big company helps capture those rules, and therefore you're locking in the advantage of your big companies. And so I would just say right now, the main thing you're going to do by creating these rules is you're going to keep out a lot of untapped potential in your country that could contribute and could be building things. I'd be very careful.
Unfortunately, we do have to wrap it because I know Joe has a flight to take. But thank you very much for your time and for the conversation, Joe. And I hope it doesn't rain in Mumbai because in Bangalore, it barely rains in Mumbai. It's a deluge.
Thank you very much.
Joe, we have a coffee table book which talks about 75 years of U.S India relations. Thanks, Mukesh, for asking to do that. Thanks, Joe and Menaka, for this amazing session, which was really, really informative, educative, and enlightening. We're talking about AI, but the museum is really about India's history and culture, not just about what we are doing today, but also what we did in the past. MAP is a new museum which we opened about 15 months ago. The whole idea was to democratize art, and when India can have the best, like you mentioned, so many things, why should we have the best museums? So for those of you who haven't been here, while dinner served, the galleries are open. Please have a look, visit it. We have people to show you what's on display there, and we have a fair amount of tech. We've just started scratching the surface with AI, and we even have some of our supporters here who are helping us do that. So please enjoy the rest of the evening, and thank you once again for choosing MAP to do it. Thank you.